I am Naomi Carter, 27 years old, and the night my mother laughed in my face, I finally understood that no amount of hard work would ever make me a daughter in her eyes. I was sitting at my parents' dining table while they discussed my twin sister's wedding like it was a royal event. Imported flowers, a private garden venue, a designer gown, a honeymoon that made no financial sense for a family that had always preached practicality. I let them talk. Then I asked the one question that should never have caused a room to go silent. What about my share of the wedding fund? They all looked at me like I had interrupted something sacred. My mother leaned back, smiled like she was explaining something obvious to a child, and said, "Gold and dirt are not the same." My sister clapped at that. Actually clapped, like humiliating me was the punchline to a joke they had all been waiting to tell. I did not cry. I did not argue. I stood up, took my keys, and walked out while my mother was still calling after me. By sunrise, I had 53 missed calls from her, 20 from my sister, and a phone full of voicemails cycling from outrage to panic. I stared at the screen for a long time before sending one reply. "Why are you begging a piece of dirt?" To understand why that text sent my whole family into crisis, you need to know what they had been taking from me for years. We were twins, but that was where the similarity ended. My sister was loud, charming, and magnetic in a way that made adults adore her. I was quieter. I liked plans, routines, and knowing exactly where things stood. My mother called me serious like it was a flaw. My father called me difficult whenever I asked why the rules were different for me. My sister got away with messes because she was spirited. I got punished for the smallest mistakes because I should have known better. At birthday parties, she got the bigger cake. At school, my mother missed my academic ceremonies, but never missed a single one of my sister's performances, even the mediocre ones. When relatives visited, they heard all about how beautiful and social my sister was. Then my mother would gesture at me like a side note and say I was the smart one. That was the box they built for me early. Useful, but forgettable. Capable, but unloved. The older we got, the less they bothered hiding it. They bought her clothes because she cared about fashion. They gave her extra spending money because she had a social life to maintain. They let her cry her way out of consequences while telling me I was too cold for refusing to play along. I used to think that if I achieved enough, behaved well enough, made their lives easier, eventually they would look at me the way they looked at her. But every win of mine only seemed to irritate them. When I got the highest grades in school, my mother said I was making my sister feel insecure. When I earned a scholarship opportunity, my father told me to stop acting superior. When I worked weekends to buy my own laptop, my mother called me stingy for not sharing it more. Nothing I did was allowed to belong to me. If I succeeded, I was selfish. If I set limits, I was difficult. If I stayed quiet, they assumed I could handle more. The wedding fund was the one thing I let myself believe might be fair. My grandparents had started it when we were teenagers, equal for both granddaughters. I remember my grandmother squeezing my hand and saying, "No matter what happens later, this will be one thing no one can take from you." I held on to that sentence for years. I even added to it myself once I started working part-time in high school. Not a huge amount, but every dollar represented hours of effort no one had forced me to give. When you grow up half-loved, you become an expert at building hope out of scraps. I took the smallest sign of fairness and treated it like proof that maybe the story was not finished yet. That was my mistake. By the time I reached adulthood, the difference between us was simple. I built things. She performed them. I worked through college on scholarships, internships, and jobs that taught me how to keep impossible schedules from collapsing. I ended up in wedding and event operations because I was good under pressure and even better at cleaning up disasters before anyone else realized there had been one. I understood contracts, vendor timelines, deposit schedules, and exactly how much emotion people attached to one perfect day. I moved to Charlotte after college and built a life that made sense to me. My apartment was not glamorous, but it was peaceful. I paid my bills, kept my promises, and learned that stability was a luxury when you had grown up in emotional chaos. My sister went the other direction. She reinvented herself every few months, depending on what kind of attention seemed easiest to get. Boutique fitness, lifestyle blogging, brand deals, event hosting, none of which lasted long enough to become a real career. Every time she failed, my parents rebranded it as potential. Every time I succeeded, they treated it like a character defect. I met Ethan at a venue walkthrough after a storm had knocked out power during a rehearsal dinner. Everyone else was panicking. He was one of the architects consulting on the property restoration, and while the bride's family was spiraling, he was the only person in the room calmer than I was. We ended up laughing in a dark hallway over emergency candles and ruined seating charts. He listened in a way that made me feel like I was not competing with noise just to be heard. We dated 2 years before talking seriously about marriage, and when we did, it felt nothing like the chaos I had grown up around. We talked budget before flowers, guest count before aesthetics. We wanted something intimate, honest, and without spectacle. For the first time in my life, I could picture a wedding without dread attached to it. Around that same time, my sister announced her engagement to Miles Holloway, a corporate attorney with expensive taste and the kind of family background my mother had been chasing her entire life. Overnight, every conversation became about venues, menus, fittings, and how this wedding had to be perfect because it would open doors. For whom, exactly? Not really for the bride. For my parents. For the image they had always built around my sister because she looked like the life they wanted people to think they lived. My mother started calling me more often, not to ask how I was, but to pick my brain. Could I recommend a florist? Could I look at a catering contract? Did I know anyone who could get them a better rate on the venue? Some part of me still wanted to be useful because usefulness had always been the closest thing I got to approval. So I answered questions. I connected them to a vendor I trusted. I flagged a bad clause in a contract. I told them what realistic costs look like. My mother thanked me like she was doing me a favor by letting me help. My sister barely thanked me at all. I told myself it did not matter. I had Ethan. I had my own future. I had that fund. I did not yet understand that to my family, my competence was never something to honor. It was just another resource to drain. The dinner where everything broke started like every other gathering in my parents' house. Too much performance. Too much pretending. My mother had called it a small planning dinner before the final wedding push. I almost did not go, but Ethan encouraged me to keep things civil if I could. So I drove in carrying a bottle of wine and the stupid hope that maybe this time they would behave like decent people for one meal. My sister was glowing in that carefully managed way she always had when she knew all eyes were on her. My mother kept producing binders and swatches and seating charts like she was running a campaign. My father talked numbers in a vague, smug way that suggested he wanted to sound important without saying anything concrete. For the first half hour, I mostly listened. Then my mother mentioned a last-minute upgrade. More flowers, better lighting, a luxury transportation option no one needed. I asked gently what that meant for the rest of the wedding fund. My mother stopped moving. My sister looked down at her plate. My father cleared his throat and reached for his water. I already knew. I just did not know how bad it was. I asked again, more directly. What does that mean for my share? My mother set down her fork and gave me the look I had seen my whole life. The one that said I was about to be punished for ruining her preferred version of reality. There really is no your share anymore, she said. Most of it went into your sister's wedding. She said it casually, like she was explaining weather. I asked about the money I had personally contributed. She shrugged. We all contribute to family, Naomi. Then I asked the question that made her smile. So you spent my grandparents' money and my money on her and never planned to tell me? She leaned back, crossed her arms, and laughed. Not nervous. Not embarrassed. Cruel. Gold and dirt are not the same. Your sister is marrying into a world where appearances matter. That investment makes sense. You and Ethan are doing some tiny tasteful thing. You do not need the same kind of help. For a second, I did not hear the room. Then my sister clapped, sharp and smug, and said, Mom is harsh, but she is not wrong. Something permanent in me cooled. My whole life I had imagined a breaking point as a dramatic explosion. I thought if I was ever pushed far enough, I would finally scream. Instead, I became very still. I looked at all three of them and realized none of them expected consequences. They expected pain. tears. An argument they could twist into proof that I was unstable and jealous. What they did not expect was for me to become strategic. I stood up. My mother told me not to be dramatic. My father said we could discuss it later. My sister rolled her eyes and asked if I was seriously going to ruin the mood over money. I picked up my bag, my keys, and my coat. Said nothing. Walked out while my mother was still calling after me. The second I got into my car, I opened my laptop. In their rush to build a luxury wedding they could not afford, they had leaned on more of my professional access than they realized. The venue rep had agreed to a hold because of my recommendation. The floral designer had approved a discount through a referral tied to my company network. A transportation vendor had delayed full payment because I had personally vouched for this family. I sent 3 emails and made 2 calls before I even backed out of the driveway. All professional. All clean. I informed each vendor that I was withdrawing personal and professional sponsorship from any pending flexibility arrangements connected to the Carter Holloway wedding. I clarified I was not financially responsible for any outstanding balances and that no one should rely on my name moving forward. I did not ask anyone to cancel anything. I just removed the support their fantasy was built on. Then I drove back to Charlotte through the night with my phone face down beside me. By sunrise, I had over 70 missed calls. The venue needed immediate confirmation. The florist was pausing production. Transportation was suspended until payment cleared. For once in their lives, they were not calling because they wanted something quietly. They were calling because everything they had built by stepping on me was shaking. I listened to one voicemail from my mother, breathless and furious and scared all at once. "Naomi, call me back right now. You are taking this too far." Then one from my sister, sharp with panic under the attitude. "Do not do this to me. Do not ruin my wedding because you are bitter." I typed one reply. "Why are you begging a piece of dirt?" Then I turned my phone off and finally went to sleep. When I woke up, I expected guilt. My entire childhood had conditioned me to believe that withholding help from people who mistreated me was somehow more shameful than the way they had treated me. But guilt was not what I felt. Relief was. Not joy. Not revenge in the cartoonish sense people imagine. Just the deep, unfamiliar relief of finally understanding that I did not have to keep volunteering to be the bridge people burned while standing on it. I called Ethan instead of answering anyone. I told him everything, including the sentence my mother had used. He was quiet for a moment in a way that told me he was angrier than he wanted me to hear. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Did you do anything wrong?" I said no. He said, "Then let them deal with what they created." That was one of the reasons I loved him. He never confused peace with surrender. Over the next few days, I learned through voicemails and mutual acquaintances that the wedding had not collapsed, but it had cracked. My father liquidated part of an account he had no business touching that quickly. My mother borrowed from relatives she privately looked down on. They kept the venue at a reduced package. They kept the dress. They kept the performance of wealth barely. Several guests noticed that vendors seemed tense. One of my mother's friends overheard an argument about unpaid balances near the reception entrance. A cousin texted me that my absence was the real topic of the night. People found it strange that a twin sister was missing, and stranger still that no one could offer the same explanation twice. Some were told I had a work emergency. Some were told I was sick. Some were told Ethan and I had broken up. My favorite rumor was that I had become too emotionally unstable to attend. That one had my mother's fingerprints all over it. The photos my sister posted afterward looked glossy enough if you did not know what had happened outside the frame. She smiled like she had won. Miles smiled like a man posing beside an expensive acquisition. My mother looked exhausted under professional makeup. My father looked older than I remembered. I looked at the pictures once and never again. The strangest part was that I did not feel consumed by any of it. I had expected anger to keep burning, but distance changed the texture of everything. My family had built their lives around image, and the moment I stepped back, I could see how fragile all of it really was. They needed me more than they would ever admit. Not because they loved me, but because I was the practical spine in a family addicted to appearances. Without me, they could still throw a party. They just could not do it cleanly. Ethan and I moved ahead with our own plans. We toured a lakeside property outside Charlotte that was smaller than any venue my mother would have approved of and immediately knew it was right. Old trees, soft light, a view that did not need to prove anything to anyone. We talked to a local chef instead of a luxury caterer. We cut our guest list down to people who had actually shown up for us in real life. Every choice felt like a correction, not just to a wedding, but to my understanding of what celebration was supposed to be. It was not performance. It was witness. About 3 months after the wedding, the first rail crack reached me from outside the family bubble. A college friend who still moved in overlapping social circles with my sister messaged me late one night. "Is everything okay with your sister and Miles?" She said Sienna had been posting vague quotes about loneliness and fake love, and had been seen crying at a restaurant while Miles left early. I felt no satisfaction, only recognition. Not because I had wanted her marriage to fail, but because I had seen the transaction from the beginning. Miles had not fallen in love with my sister. He had selected her. She was polished enough for photographs, eager enough to be shaped, and shallow enough to mistake being displayed for being cherished. Status is not intimacy. Being chosen is not being known. Once the performance stopped being exciting, they were left with each other, and there was not much there. Around the same time, my father's finances began unraveling. He had always believed he could outmaneuver reality. Only reality arrived faster than expected. Emergency borrowing turned into rolling balances. One of his colleagues apparently learned he had borrowed privately from client social circles to cover personal obligations, and his professional credibility took a hit. My mother's boutique started missing payments. She sold inventory at discount, then pretended it was a seasonal strategy. Friends she used to entertain stopped calling as often once there was no longer a polished table to sit at. They had spent so long curating the appearance of stability that they had no idea how to survive without applause. That was when the messages started again. Through numbers I did not know, through distant relatives, through one old neighbor who left me a long voicemail about how family is family no matter what. My mother mailed a letter to my office. Not my apartment. My office. That alone told me she still did not understand shame. In the letter, she tried every version of the truth except the real one. She wrote that wedding stress had caused things to be said in the wrong tone. She wrote that families make mistakes. She wrote that my sister was struggling in her marriage and needed her twin. She did not write that she had called me dirt. She did not write that she had taken money meant for me. She did not write that she had only noticed my value once my absence had a price tag. I folded the letter and threw it away. A week later, my sister called from a private number. I answered because some part of me wanted to hear what her voice sounded like when life stopped clapping for her. She did not bother with small talk. Miles was always traveling, always irritated, always making comments about her spending and her family's instability. Then she moved to the real point. She asked if I still had contacts who could help my mother's boutique with an event partnership. She asked if Ethan knew any investors. Even in the middle of her own unraveling, she still saw me as a utility. Not a sister. Not a person she had humiliated. A tool she hoped had not yet learned its worth. I told her no. She got sharp immediately, accused me of enjoying this, accused me of waiting for them to suffer so I could feel superior. I finally said something that had been true for years. I do not need you to suffer to know who I am. I just needed to stop letting you decide it. She hung up. Not long after, I heard my parents were quietly preparing to sell their house and move somewhere smaller. The same house where I had spent years being told my role was to understand, to adjust, to give more. Now it was one more thing they could not afford to keep. Ethan found me sitting in our kitchen the night I heard that news, staring at nothing. He sat beside me and said something I never forgot. Some people would rather lose everything than admit they were wrong to the one person they treated the worst. He was right. My family was not collapsing because I had abandoned them. They were collapsing because every major choice they made was designed to preserve a lie. The lie that image mattered more than character. The lie that favoritism had no cost. The lie that the child who kept everything functioning would always stay close enough to be used. I was done mistaking their emergencies for my responsibility. The final time they reached out was nearly 8 months after that dinner. By then Ethan and I had finished nearly all of our wedding planning. Our life had become so steady that the chaos I came from felt like a separate country. Then one evening, just as I was leaving work, a video call came from an unknown number. My mother's face filled the screen. Older, thinner, her makeup gone, her posture collapsed in a way I had never seen. My father sat beside her, looking as though pride had finally become too heavy to carry. And behind them, on the edge of a sofa in what was clearly not their old house, sat my sister. Silent. No perfect hair. No smugness. No audience left to perform for. None of us spoke at first. Then my mother started crying. Real crying, not the theatrical kind she produced in public when she wanted sympathy. She said my name the way people say it when they have run out of every other strategy. She told me they had lost the house. That my sister and Miles were separating and the divorce was getting ugly. That my father's career was damaged. Then she said the words I had waited my whole life to hear and no longer needed. We were wrong. I looked at her and understood that apology without accountability still sounds incomplete. So I asked the only question that mattered. Wrong about what? She closed her eyes like the answer physically hurt. Wrong about you, she said. Wrong about your worth. Wrong about the way we treated you. Wrong about choosing appearances over fairness. My sister still would not look at the camera. My father finally spoke and said he should have stopped it years ago. That he had told himself he was keeping peace when really he was protecting the wrong child from consequences and sacrificing the right one to do it. I believed he meant it. Somehow that made it sadder, not better. Because truth arriving late does not restore the years it stole. Then my mother said what she had really called for. She asked if we could start over. She asked if I could find it in my heart to help the family heal. The shape of the request was the same as it had always been. Come back. Stabilize us. Make this easier to survive. I looked at all three of them and felt something I had not expected. Not hatred. Not vindication. Clarity. The kind that comes when grief has finished turning into wisdom. I told them I was getting married soon. Small and peaceful and filled with people who had never made me earn basic dignity. My mother asked through tears if there was still a chance they could be part of it. My sister finally looked up. For the first time in my life, she looked small. Not because life had made her good, but because it had stripped away the audience she used to mistake for love. I took a breath and gave them the truth they had spent years avoiding. You taught me exactly what I was to this family when you took what was mine, laughed in my face, and expected me to stay. I believed you. I built my life around that lesson. Now you have to live with it too. My mother whispered, please. My sister opened her mouth, then closed it. My father looked at me with the expression of a man seeing the final bill for a debt he had ignored too long. I told them I did not wish ruin on any of them. I told them I genuinely hoped they learned to treat people before they needed something from them. I told my sister I hoped she one day understood that being favored is not the same as being loved, and that being protected from consequences can leave a person weak in all the ways that matter. Then I said I was not coming back. I was not reopening a door they had only knocked on once life became unbearable on their side of it. I ended the call before they could answer. A month later, I married Ethan beside a quiet lake under strings of warm lights and old trees that did not need decorating to feel beautiful. No spectacle. No false luxury. No desperate need to impress anyone. Just vows, laughter, and people who showed up early because they wanted to help. When I walked toward Ethan, I did not think about what my family had taken from me. I thought about what they had failed to destroy. My peace. My judgment. My ability to love without humiliating someone first. That, more than anything, was the ending they never expected me to have. Favoritism poisons everyone it touches. It damages the child who is neglected, but it also hollows out the child who is worshipped, teaching them that love can be replaced by indulgence, and that value comes from display instead of character. It teaches parents to confuse control with care and image with success, until they wake up surrounded by the wreckage of their own choices. And it teaches the overlooked child one of the hardest lessons of all. That sometimes healing begins the moment you stop begging to be treated fairly by people who profit from your silence. Family should be the first place a person learns dignity, not the place they lose it. Love without respect is not love. Forgiveness without change is not reconciliation. And protecting your peace from people who only recognize your worth once they need it is not cruelty. It is self-respect.